chapter 9, verses 51 through 62. And according to my bulletin, it says it's on page 843 in the Bibles in your pews if you'd like to follow along. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go toward Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of them. On their way, they entered the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. But they did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them. And then they went on to another village. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home." And Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." Please pray with me. Loving God, speak to us that we may hear the words that you need us to hear on this day. And be with us as we seek to do your will now and forever. Amen. Have you ever watched a movie or a television show where someone is being chased? Good action films, you know, they always have a good chase in them, right? So it could be a criminal who is running from the authorities, or it could be the good guy running from several bad guys. They run between cars, they climb fences, sometimes they even jump from roof to roof. That's the one that always makes me the most nervous. Now, as you're watching these chases, have you ever noticed that almost all the time, the person that's being chased keeps looking back? Instead of just looking that way and finding the fastest or the most clever route to take to get away, they're always looking over their shoulder, checking to see where the chaser is. And what happens, 9 times out of 10, unless you're James Bond, that person gets caught. I will admit that if I am watching this movie or show by myself, I will often yell at the screen, "Stop looking back! Just run!" Now, why do you think that I think it is a better idea not to look back? Anybody? It slows you down. You cannot simultaneously run as fast as possible in one direction while you are looking in the opposite direction. It doesn't work. You cannot effectively go forward and backward at the same time. And at the beginning of the story from 1 Kings, Elijah is stuck looking back. Elijah is running, but he is not running toward anything good or hopeful. He is running away from, and he is trying to hide from his past. Now, many of us know the story of Elijah and Jezebel and about how they did not get along very well, and about how they had a contest to see whose God was more powerful, and about how Elijah had killed all the prophets of Jezebel's God, and about how she is really, really, really mad. And in spite of the fact that Elijah knows that he is working for the one God, the one true God, and doing what he's supposed to be doing, he's afraid of Jezebel, who has threatened to kill him, and he wants to get as far away from her as he possibly can. So as Elijah runs through the wilderness, more than willing to give up on life entirely, he keeps saying, "Take my life, take my life." He encounters angels who feed him and try to get his strength built up to go on. But more importantly, he encounters God. And God I don't know, doesn't seem to be very happy. What does God ask Elijah? Not once, but twice. Do you remember? What are you doing here, Elijah? This is not, hey Elijah, what are you up to today? It's not even, so Elijah, why are you hanging out here in the desert? Or why are you climbing these mountains? Or why are you in the cave? This is about Elijah. Why are you here? Instead of in the place where I put you to work. Why are you picking up the pieces and forging ahead, bringing relief and making life better for my people? Why are you here when you should be there? Elijah's answer makes it clear that he is stuck looking back. Oh God, I've worked so hard, I've done my job for you, but now everybody's against me, and that mean Jezebel woman, she's trying to kill me. Elijah is refusing to move on. He cannot continue to do God's work, to bring truth to the king, to comfort the people. He is not able to help release them from Jezebel's clutches because he can only think about how badly he was treated. He cannot figure out another way to accomplish his goals because he can't stop wondering what he did wrong or blaming all those who stood in his way the last time. Elijah insists on looking back and therefore has no hope of being able to move forward. So how does God feel about this? Anyone? Does God say, oh, Elijah, you poor thing, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry they were mean to you, so you come sit here with me and I'll take care of everything out there from now on. No. Not even close. God tells Elijah that he has to stop looking back and instead he must wholeheartedly dedicate himself to moving forward. He has to go, he has to ignore Jezebel, he has to anoint new kings, he has to anoint a new prophet, he has to keep going no matter what. And if he does all of those things, he will find 7,000 allies where he thought he had none. As long as he's willing to keep going forward, God can find for him new ways and additional resources. Elijah thinks he is alone and hopeless, but in fact he has everything and everyone he needs to continue doing his work. He needs to simply remember that he's being called to go that way. Sure, he had a setback, but which one of us doesn't have one of those every once in a while? What is important is that he knows what to do next. Now, one might think that after hundreds of years and having known Elijah's story, people in Jesus' time would have figured out that they cannot get stuck looking behind them, any more than they can smite everyone who tries to stand in their way. But no, here we come into the story from Luke, and Jesus is moving forward, and he is looking ahead, while all the others are not cooperating, and God's purposes are still being delayed. First, there are the Samaritans. Now, admittedly, we know from some of our stories that all Samaritans are not bad, but this group is clearly being difficult. They're stuck in a tradition which is not helpful and is not forward-looking. When it says in the story that the Samaritans would not receive Jesus because he had set his sights on Jerusalem, it refers to the fact that the Samaritans did not recognize Jerusalem as a holy place. So since traveling there was to them a waste of time, the Samaritans would not offer hospitality to any pilgrims going in that direction, which was a bad thing. They're always supposed to offer hospitality, and they just refused. They're not willing to look in a different direction and maybe see things in a new way. So the Samaritans are being stubborn, but in this case, some of the people following Jesus are just as bad. They want to rain fire down on the Samaritans. But Jesus says, no, we just have to keep going that way. They want to follow Jesus right after they attend to family matters. And Jesus says, no, we have to go that way. They want to do the work, but first they want to finish the laundry, they want to mow the lawn, they want to do all the chores. And Jesus says, no, we have to go that way. We have very important things to do there. These would-be followers have to understand that if they're going to start anew, if they are going to start a whole new life and do and look at things differently, they just have to pick up and go already. Looking back to see what they are leaving will only slow them down, will only cause second thoughts, and stand in the way of the new things they are hoping to create. Now, I'm not saying at all that the past is not important. The past makes us who we are, but we cannot keep going back there so often that we get stuck there. Jesus talks about putting a hand to the plow, but looking back. So let's pretend for a moment that we're farmers back in the day, readying our fields for crops, and we're walking behind the plow, and we're going in this direction, and we're looking like this. How successful do you think we're going to be with our crops that year? Plowing is about hope, right? Seeds, growing, newness, possibilities, all of the good things that are ahead. But if we plow and the whole time we're looking back at where we've been, the only thing that we're going to see is old ground and our mistakes. How crooked we're walking. How difficult everything behind us has been. We can do that. We can be like Elijah. We can see our fear. We can see our confusion, our regret, whatever's back there. But there's very little hopeful about looking at the empty stuff behind us. No future, no growing, no potential. Just a past that we cannot change. God needs us to be going forward. God needs us to be looking at the direction in which we're going so that we can see the hope on the horizon and then help create more for others. It's the only way any of us will get anywhere. Now, Randy, can you have the first picture? Do any of you know what this photo is? Have you ever seen it before? Any guesses? The man on the left is Charlie Paddock. He was a great track star for the United States in the early 1900s. The man on the right is Jackson Schultz, who was another great runner for the United States at the same time. Now, can you see what's happening in the picture? Schultz is turning to look for Paddock to see how far behind him Paddock is in the race. And can you see what's happening? Paddock wins. Schultz looks back, loses some of his momentum, and comes in second. You cannot go forward and go back at the same time. Now, this photo is actually a recreation of an actual event. It was featured in the movie Chariots of Fire. We couldn't find the original one. In the film, Chariots of Fire, have you ever seen it? Anyone seen it? Harold Abrahams is trying to be the Olympic champion in the 100-meter run. He wants to be the fastest man in the world. So he loses some minor races, and he gets all depressed, and he wants to give up, and he can't stop thinking about how others beat him, and I don't run if I can't win, and all that stuff. So a personal trainer takes him on as a client, and he shows him the original newspaper clipping of this race. And he talks to Abrams about the fact that he's focusing too much on what was behind him and not enough on his goal. The whole movie is about Abrams learning how to look ahead at where he wants to be instead of feeling sorry for himself and giving up. Now, Randy, can you next one? This one is not as clear, I'm afraid, but I think you can still see it. The movie is actually based on the true story of the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris, and this photo is of the actual Olympic race in which Harold Abrahams eventually ran and won. It's a little grainy, I know, but it's the original. It's 100 years old after all, so. But you can still see what's happening, right? On the right. See over there? It's Jackson Schultz. What's he doing? He's looking back. Who's winning the race? Not him. He's gazing either in awe or horror, I can't decide, as Abraham breaks through the tape, right? And look at Abraham, there's no doubt which way he is headed. He's focused, every part of his body is going toward that finish line. I mean, look at me, he's like this. It looks like he's trying to sprout wings to make sure it gets there first. Abraham's, like Elijah and the disciples, learned that he was never going to get where he most wanted to be unless he stopped focusing on previous defeats and instead embraced the hope ahead of him. This is a lesson I am guessing that most of us have all had to learn. Is there anyone here who has never had a second thought? It's a natural human response, but we do not have to give into it in the long term. We need to go toward the hope, the future, the promise. What's back there can inform us, but it does not control us, and it need not block us. God knows it, and Jesus tried to teach us about it lots of times. We can't do God's work or any work if we are not looking in God's direction as we walk through the rest of the stuff that's all around us. Because the best stuff is not back there. It is always up ahead. Now, Paul Harvey, some of you know Paul Harvey? Do you have famous broadcaster, he had a very characteristic voice and manner for years and years of radio. Once said, "Ever since I made tomorrow my favorite day, I have been uncomfortable looking back." We need to start being uncomfortable looking back. We need to keep tomorrow in our sights because that is what keeps hope in our hearts. And in the end, nothing can beat hope. Amen. Our final hymn is number 16.